How do you do? Mr. Carl Lemley feels it would be a little unkind to present this picture without just a word of friendly warning. We are about to unfold the story of Frankenstein, a man of science who sought to create a man after his own image without reckoning upon God. It is one of the strangest tales ever told. It deals with the two great mysteries of creation, life and death. I think it will thrill you. It may shock you. It might even horrify you. So if any of you feel that you do not care to subject your nerves to such a strain, now is your chance to, well, we've warned you.
Hello and welcome to Horror Cult Trash Over, the show that discusses all of the masterpieces and trash pieces of genre cinema. I'm Gary.
And I'm Chris.
And it is Pride Month yet again.
It is. It's coming around very quickly.
Every day is Pride Month, obviously. We're proud every day. But there's one month of the year where us gays get to shout it slightly louder than usual, and we like to celebrate that by talking about a whole bunch of gay films.
We do.
And as I mentioned at the end of the last episode, usually we would have guests, but things have been crazy busy this year for us, and we couldn't match up our schedule with most of the guests. We have got one coming on soon. We are going to be joined by Unbound and Rewound Horror Podcast to discuss Vamp in 2 weeks' time. But until then, you're stuck with just the two of us. And to start it off, let's talk about what's new with Chris and Gary.
Yes. Would you like to talk about what you've enjoyed this week?
I would, yeah. My best of the week.
What's your best of the week?
Which, of course, if you're new to the show, these are first-time watches, the best and worst of the week. So this won't be Chris's, but mine is Election. Every now and then a film comes along and it changes you, and you regret not watching it for all those years that you didn't watch it. And that film recently is Election for me. Watched it in 35mm at Prince Charles Cinema in London, and I loved it. It was absolutely phenomenal. It's hilarious. Has some career best performances for the cast. Great, perfect for this episode. Great gay representation in there. A great lesbian character. Yeah, I just have so many things to say about Election. I love it.
Yeah. In my opinion, Reese Witherspoon gives one of the best performances of the 90s as Tracy Flick. Completely iconic. I loved the film when I was younger, and we both have lists of films that we've seen and we want to show the other one, and the list gets smaller over the years, and this has always been really high on that list. So when we had the opportunity to see it in 35mm on the big screen, because I'd only ever seen it on VHS, showing my age there, we jumped at it because I knew you would love it, and of course I love it. So yeah, love Election.
So what's your best of the week?
My best of the week is first time watch Dogtooth.
Yeah, also first time watch for me. Honourable mention for me.
Yeah, so we're making our way through the Yorgos Lanthimos films.
Yes,
aren't we?
We are.
We've started not right at the beginning, but we kind of started with Dogtooth.
What's available?
And making our way forward. Of course, we've seen other ones at the cinema. But I loved it. I thought it was very out there. Certainly not for everyone.
No.
I wouldn't show my mother this film.
No.
But if you like films that push boundaries, very much so, then this is for you, and it gets you thinking, and it's very avant-garde at times, and sometimes a little bit of a head scratcher, but in a good way. Yeah. You're trying to interpret whatever you're watching, and I enjoyed it.
It's also hilarious.
Yeah, I had fun with it as well, despite me saying that, because it can be quite dark at times. It's actually a very dark comedy.
Yeah.
It is laugh out loud funny at moments as well. So I really, really appreciated it. Really enjoyed it.
And I'm sure we both have the same worst of the week.
We certainly do.
It was the Odeon Screen and Scene last week. We're always excited for those new films. And for once, a film that I had never heard of, a film I didn't know what it was about. Until that name came up on the BBFC card, I had no idea this film existed. I knew there was a new Western coming out with Viggo Mortensen, but I didn't know anything else. I didn't know the title, what it's about, nothing. I miss those days when I didn't know about this film. This was fucking dire. It's The Dead Don't Hurt.
Yeah, do you know why The Dead Don't Hurt? Because they don't have to watch The Dead Don't Hurt.
The Dead Don't Hurt, but watching this film certainly does.
Yes.
It's fucking boring.
It was, incredibly dull. It was incredibly dull. It took itself very seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And I hated it. I actually really hated it. I thought it looked beautiful at points. I'll give it that.
It did.
I think some acting choices were weird.
Yeah. This film is written, directed, produced by, starring, and composed by Viggo Mortensen, and the entire film exists so he could be a hero in it, and that it's like a massive ego trip.
He literally dresses up as a knight.
Yeah.
In a western.
Yeah.
In a kind of dream sequence or whatever, and I feel like the irony was lost.
Yes.
I do feel a bit like it was meant to be very serious and very poetic. But it came across real cringe.
Yeah, he genuinely acts like Tommy Wiseau at points. I can't understand how the same Viggo Mortensen from Lord of the Rings acted like that in that film. It was so awkward.
He makes some very weird sort of facial expressions.
Yeah.
Which makes the love story kind of weird.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a bit like, and then there's a jump in time, but he kind of looks the same.
Yeah. And you know, if you're a regular listener, how much we hate the use of sexual assault in films if it's not dealt with, or if it's used as a cheap plot device. And fucking hell, this film is guilty of that.
True.
Genuinely just abysmal. Yeah, can't recommend it at all. Do you have any honorable mentions? I do not.
I actually, and as someone, a self-professed, and there's a Japanese word for it that I can't remember, but as somebody who buys books and doesn't read them, I was very pleased and proud to inform everyone this week that I read a book.
Yeah, that is great.
I read Yukio Mishima's The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea. And very dark, a very dark book, very much in keeping with sort of Mishima's work and sort of how he was perceived to be, and I won't get into his story, but if you watch the Paul Schrader film Mishima, obviously, you'd know a little bit, because it's a very sort of dark, philosophical book, and I really enjoyed it. So I was very, very pleased to have finished a book that I purchased. I don't know if anyone else is guilty of this. I'm sure there's many of us out there who have a bookshelf full of books that don't get finished. So I was very pleased. A little bit of happy Chris news this week.
Yeah.
Now it's the Blu-rays as well.
Yes.
If anyone else is also guilty of that, I'm sure there's many people out there who are just like me and Gary.
I'm sure
in that sense.
Well, speaking of books, Here's a film based on a book.
Yes, there we go.
Spoiler warning is now in effect, and we are starting Pride Month with a discussion about a film that has been on my radar to discuss for Pride Month since we started the podcast, because I'm sure there is a lot to be said here about just how gay this film is.
Mm-hmm.
We are going back to Universal Monsters 1931, and we are discussing Frankenstein.
Yeah, very much open to a queer interpretation for many
Yes.
reasons, and I'm sure we'll go through them thoroughly.
We absolutely
So,
will.
a perfect Pride Month selection here.
Yeah.
Lots to talk about in terms of queerness, lots to talk about in terms of horror,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm sure you've heard it all before, but one of the original horror films that has, in many ways, created the genre
Yeah.
as we see it in film. Highly influential,
Yeah.
highly, massively influential over what is almost 100 years.
Absolutely.
Like, really,
It'll be
really
public domain
close.
soon enough.
Yeah, like really close to 100 years.
Yeah.
And still, we see it time and time again.
Yeah.
Its influence on horror.
Absolutely. And it's directed by James Whale, the homosexual James Whale. Director of They Dare Not Love. I don't know if there's any sort of hints in the titles of the films that he made. They Dare Not Love, Bride of Frankenstein, The Invisible Man, Green Hell, The Man in the Iron Mask, Wives Under Suspicion, Sinners in Paradise, The Old Dark House, and more. Biographers have remarked that Bela Lugosi, he turned down this film. And was right to do so, as the original script he was given portrayed the monster as a grunting killer machine and not the part eventually played by Boris Karloff. Neither original director, Robert Florey, nor Lugosi ever turned down this film as the end product because they never once read the James Whale script. Indeed, it was this director, and Whale also scoffed at the original script and refused to do it, whose sensitivity overhauled the entire script as he rewrote it completely, turning the monster into a caring, sensitive, and lost soul. What was assigned to Florey and Lugosi was a monster with neither pathos nor heart, but a violent killer machine, a bit like what Karloff eventually portrayed, and would himself regret doing so in Son of Frankenstein. Sensitive soul, Frankenstein.
Sensitive soul,
Very sensitive.
yes. James Whale, a closeted director. I don't feel like he was too out and proud at the time, or at least to the general public.
Yeah.
Famously portrayed by Sir Ian McKellen in Gods and Monsters.
Yeah.
And his script obviously is open to queer interpretation.
Yeah.
Massively. And again, we'll really delve into that as we continue.
He was offered a list of 30 plus film adaptations he could direct, and he picked this one. He said he did so because he wanted to get away from the war films with which he'd been associated, and he's now by far best remembered for his 4 horror films.
Yeah.
So it's also written by Garrett Fort, who did The Mask of Zorro, The Mad Room, Inside Job, Dracula, Dracula's Daughter, which we covered last year, Street of a Chance, Blood on the Sun, The Man in Half Moon Street, and more. Francis Edward Farrago. Pride Month, I have to be careful how I say that surname. Little Caesar, Dancing Pirate, Undercover Man, Easy Come, Easy Go, Renegades, My Friend Flicker, and more. And an uncredited Robert Florey, who, of course, was replaced by James Whale. And there are only two scenes left in this film that was actually Florey's work, and that's the scene, and the scene with the burning windmill is one of them.
Okay.
So he also did Wagon Train, The New Adventures of Don Juan. So I was closer the first time. Rogue's Regiment, Study in Scarlet, The Man Who Called Back, Murders in the Rue Morgue, and more. Also, an uncredited John Russell, who did The Sea God, Three Brothers, The Pagan even, Bo Guest, Girl of the Port, The Red Mark, The Sorrows of Satan, and more. And finally, also written by an uncredited Richard Shea, who was the scenario editor, and he did The Mummy, Where East is East, Trader Horn, Arizona Raiders, Lancelot and Guinevere, Gunfight, Five Guns to the Tombstone, Fury, Top Gun, The Lone Gun, Gun Brothers, and more.
The Gun trilogy.
I'm going to assume he's American. So, and of course, based on the novel by Mary Shelley, gay icon herself, bisexual icon even, and the play by Peggy Webling and John L. Balderston. So, this also piqued my curiosity last year when we spoke about Dracula's Daughter as to why there are so many writers on these Universal Monsters films.
I think it's just the studio system, basically. I think it's just... I feel like the studios micromanage to a certain degree. And yeah, I think because you'll probably get a writer, and I don't think it's necessarily 5 people sat in a circle writing, giving ideas, this, that, and the other. It tends to go through different people, and someone might get a writing credit for, like you said, 2 scenes.
Yeah.
Someone might get a writing credit for a little bit of dialogue of some sort. So I think it's just a bit of studio micromanaging in that sense.
I mean, it's nice to have a film where we've listed all those writers and we're able to say, oh, actually, do you know what?
Yeah,
we got a masterpiece out of it.
Yeah, it's not overcooked. I'd like to think that they just kind of stuck to James Whale's script and then just went with it from there.
The strange thing is, I mean, obviously James Whale's script changed a lot, but he's actually not credited at all for a script. He's credited as director, obviously.
Oh.
So I'm curious to how much he changed in there, considering he's not credited, not even like uncredited, credited.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So are we under the impression he didn't do the script?
There's nothing there apart from Bela Lugosi and the previous director that says so. And I mean...
Oh, okay.
Who am I to call Dracula a liar?
There we are.
Budget, $262,000, and it made $12 million worldwide. So, a lot of controversy surrounding it. Of course, there's a scene in which the monster kills a child, which we will definitely be delving into a lot later. But for now, whilst we're talking about the fact that it was so successful despite these controversies, it's a good time to mention it because this is the main controversial scene. So upon its original release in 1931, the second part of this scene was cut by state censorship boards in Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, and New York. Those states also objected to a line they considered blasphemous that occurred during Frankenstein's monologue it might as well be a monologue. It's one of the most famous bits of dialogue in cinematic history, where he's saying that the creature's alive, and then he says, in the name of God, now I know what it feels like to be God. People were fucking fuming about this. Kansas requested to cut in 32 scenes, which, if they had been removed, would have cut half of the film.
Oh, shit.
Jason Joy of the Studio Relations Committee sent censor representative Joseph Breen to urge them to reconsider. Eventually, an edited version was released in Kansas. As with many pre-code films that were reissued after strict enforcement of the production code in 1934, Universal made cuts from the original camera negative. First, most of the excised footage is often lost. However, the Maria scene was found during the early 80s, by the British
Oh,
National Film
wow.
Archive.
Early 80s.
Yeah.
Wow.
And has been restored to modern prints of the film.
Oh.
I can't imagine a film without that scene.
No.
Like, it's very important to the second half of the film.
Incredibly important. Yeah, absolutely.
In the Irish Free State, the film was banned on February 5th, 1932 for being demoralising and unsuitable for children or nervous people.
As a nervous person, I'd just like to thank them for doing that for me.
Thank you, Irish Free State. Age-restricted certificates were not introduced in the country until 1965. The decision was overturned by the appeal board on March 8th, and the film was passed uncut on March 9th. The film was successfully banned in Northern Ireland, Quebec, Sweden, Italy, and Czechoslovakia.
There we go.
And the famous warning at the beginning of the film was added late in the film's production as proactive measures towards religious groups getting up in arms about the film's theme of a man taking control of what is believed to be God's power. Famed director, famed, just in case you misheard me, not the director
Famed
of
director
Fame.
Richard Attenborough.
Famed
director
director John Huston, a staff writer for Universal at the time, wrote an early version of that warning. So, yeah, we talk about the video nasties on here and films that are banned quite a lot. Interesting to look back at the reaction to this back in the early 30s, considering now it's like a PG.
Yeah. And it seems that the horror itself, apart from the Maria scene, wasn't really what got people up in arms.
No.
It's the religious aspects. It's what is perceived to be blasphemy.
And that's such a small line of dialogue as well. I mean, it's iconic, but it's such a small line of dialogue when you think about when the world has had similar reactions to films like The Exorcist and The Omen, you know, films that are outwardly religious.
Well, I mean, this I think says a lot about religion. I think religion explicitly is a main theme. But it's that line of dialogue. It is specifically that line of dialogue. And you know how these people tend to take one little aspect of something and blow it up, make something out of nothing in that sense. Or make a sort of mountain out of a molehill, as they would say. So, yeah, I can imagine at the time people were getting up in arms about this. Yeah,
and I think the fact that it made so much money worldwide kind of shows that the sensibility of, oh shit, this is really horrifying, we're not meant to be watching this, let's go.
Yes,
it's been in place for a very long time.
It's always the best advertisement, isn't it? Controversy.
Yeah.
Pays for itself, doesn't it?
Yeah. Should we talk about who's in it?
Yeah, in a section we like to call Hey, I Know You.
So Colin Clive plays Henry Frankenstein. He's also the star of Bride of Frankenstein, Mad Love, Christopher Strong, The Woman Between, History is Made at Night, Men on Her Mind, Looking Forward, and more.
Yeah, so not really a prominent actor.
No.
I wouldn't. I mean, with all intents and purposes, this is still kind of a almost a B movie, really. Frankenstein. It's horror. It's not. You know, it's not a Joan Crawford romance film. You know, it's not that kind perceived that kind of way. So by far his most famous role.
Yeah.
And he does a wonderful job.
Yeah. And you mentioned Joan Crawford. Speaking of, Betty Davis was supposed to play this next role, but James Whale thought that she was too strong a personality for it to work. Can you imagine being a gay man in the 30s and having to turn down Betty Davis?
Yeah.
Devastating.
I
think she would have been great in this role.
I think it would have become a Betty Davis film.
It would have, yes.
And that's the highest compliment, because she is one of the best to ever do it. But it would be, she would have rewritten that script in a second. She would have said, who is this mousy character who barely says a fucking word? I want to be in more scenes. I want to. This would be
Yeah.
Betty Davis stars in Frankenstein.
Yeah. Instead, we got May Clark, who plays Elizabeth, and she was in Magnificent Obsession, Waterloo Bridge, King of the Rocket Men, Daredevil of the Clouds, Big Deal at Dodge City, Ask Any Girl, Mohawk, and more.
Yeah, so again, not sort of went on to the biggest career. You look at Letterboxd, and she was in Singing in the Rain, but she was uncredited as a hairdresser.
Yeah.
Magnificent Obsession. She's quite low down on these sort of lists, you know. So
I think she should have gone on something bigger.
yeah, I think she's very glamorous.
Oh, those outfits. There's a lot to be said about those.
There is. Oof. But yeah, again, by far her most famous role.
Yeah. John Bowles plays Victor Moritz. He was in The Age of Innocence, The Life of Virgie Winters, The Desert Song, Babes in Baghdad, Thousands Cheer, Between Us Girls, Road to Happiness, Craig's Wife, and more.
Yeah, probably also fairly famous for Stella Dallas.
Yeah.
He was one of the leads in that quite, well-known Barbara Stanwyck film. But again, this is probably what he's most known for. But Frankenstein is obviously a culturally very significant film.
Yeah. And of course, the one that we're all here to see, Boris Karloff. Sorry, question mark.
Question mark.
Monster.
I liked that.
No idea.
I did like that.
Plays the monster. Yeah, it's a nice little touch to the credits. Especially back then when films like this was still fairly new. You'd only had Dracula by this point. And obviously other smaller B movies as well. But yes, it is Boris Karloff as the monster. Star of Bride of Frankenstein, The Mummy, The Black Cat, The Mask of Fu Manchu, How the Grinch Stole Christmas, The Sorcerers, The Terror, Black Sabbath, Targets, and the list goes on and on. Iconic, and he truly is the face of this character.
Yes.
This is obviously a character and a franchise that has gone on to spawn countless films, TV shows, parodies, toys, Funko Pops, everything. You can find Frankenstein on anything. And this is still the face you go back to.
Yes.
This is always the Frankenstein you think of when you think of Frankenstein, a Frankenstein's monster.
Yeah.
It's iconic, and he plays the role like no one else ever could. Like, it is a really phenomenal performance that really, I think, says a lot about why character actors, and particularly people like Doug Jones, deserve so much more recognition for what they do, because just playing that creature isn't just playing a character with very little dialogue. It's impactful, and it's the reason the film works.
Yeah, it's a physicality as well as a performance.
Yeah.
It's almost like a dance.
Yeah.
Really, the physical nature of his performance. It's great. Obviously iconic. This is the image that everybody thinks of whenever Frankenstein as a concept is mentioned. The book, the play, the film, everything that came afterwards. This is what people think of. And it probably isn't what, if you actually put body parts together, it wouldn't look like this.
No.
It wouldn't. It would be more in tune to Kenneth Branagh's interpretation with Robert De Niro, where it not quite human, but also not as boxy, should we say. But, who wants that? I want this.
Yeah.
This is what I want to see. This is the interpretation. This is the look. This is the performance.
Yeah. absolutely. Also, I found him so scary when I was a kid. Like, I don't think I ever watched the film in full. I was very aware of Frankenstein. Like, we had a Frankenstein like rubbery head thing coming out of the door, that we brought from a joke shop.
Okay.
I had a weird childhood. What can I say? But yeah, I just always remember that image, and it was obviously modelled after the Boris Karloff one, and I always thought it was absolutely terrifying. When did you first watch Frankenstein?
It must be a very long time ago.
Really? So it wasn't when we watched it
No,
for the first time? Oh, okay.
No. I'd watched it well before then. But yeah. Always go back to it.
And the question we'll be asking during every Pride Month episode: what makes this gay? I will tell you what makes this gay. So Mary Shelley was, of course, bisexual, and she created the character. And James Whale was gay, and he made the character what we all know it as now with his direction. And the whole story is an allegory of gay panic in 19th century England, where sexual relationships between men had been criminalized for 500 years.
Yes.
There's no avoiding that here. There's no way you're like, well, you don't have to make everything. No. This is so fucking gay. Like, it's almost not even subtext at times. Like, the dialogue in particular during some scenes, it's so well written. I think those are the moments where it feels like James Whale has taken part in this script.
Yeah.
Particularly a monologue about living dangerously. It's very, very on the nose.
Yeah. And I think the interpretation for me is that the character of Henry Frankenstein is closeted.
Yeah.
I don't think that Frankenstein's monster is gay. No, but I think Henry Frankenstein is gay. And we can interpret his actions and the film. And I I've never read the novel. It wasn't one that they made us read in school. Unfortunately,
I did read it in school.
Did you?
Yeah, don't remember much about it, but I did.
But I think the film in particular, we can interpret so much of it as Henry Frankenstein being closeted.
Yeah, but also as well as maybe the character himself isn't gay, of the monster, but that figure of the sensitive monster who is an outcast from society, who society are hunting down because he's so different to everyone else. It's I don't look at him as a villain in this film.
No.
It very much, it feels like a symbol for being queer.
Yeah, I think queer, but I also think prejudice as a whole.
Yeah.
I think Frankenstein's monster is a representation of so many minorities, so many groups.
The idea that he's born the way he is and he can't help that, and that's why he's being hunted down.
Absolutely.
It really it speaks for itself.
Yeah, and we'd obviously discuss that further.
Yeah. Shall we talk about our feature presentation?
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
When this dead hand moves, the monster created by a man they called Mad is turned loose to strike terror into the hearts of men. To shock women into uncontrolled hysteria.
Elizabeth!
To prey upon the innocence of children. This is the story you've heard about, talked about. The spine-tingling, blood-chilling story that stuns your emotions. Frankenstein.
So, we start with a very camp opening monologue that you will have heard at the start of this episode. a monologue warning you about how strange and scary the film is. A monologue iconically recreated for Simpsons Treehouse of Horrors.
Yes. Love it.
I love this scene. It really gets you pumped for the film. Like, even watching it all these years later, it kind of like it. I don't think you can beat putting on a film like this at around Halloween time. It's just that just this monologue, it just really sets it up perfectly.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit William Castle.
Yeah.
And I like that. And yeah, I think it's something that gets your intrigue going. It's I can imagine an audience in 1930 whatever going, ooh,
Yeah.
oh, what are we in for? Because
Uh-huh.
this came afterwards, didn't it?
Yeah.
It wasn't from the first run, but
it doesn't pull no punches, because then in a village of the Bavarian Alps, Henry Frankenstein and his assistant Fritz, a hunchback, piece together a human body. Some of the parts are from freshly buried bodies and some from the bodies of recently hanged criminals. So it wastes no time, and it's only an hour and 10 minutes. It gets you right into it, and that concept alone for 1931 is like, oh shit, wow, this is dark.
Yeah, it's a very and Dracula was the same year, so together with Dracula, it set so many of how we see Gothic horror, of how we see horror around graveyards and hilly areas and empty spaces and all of that good stuff, and it really set the tone for all of that. They're there watching a funeral take place. A fresh corpse has been buried, and then they cut down the hanged body, and we see it drop down for inspection and all of that good stuff. It really set the tone for so much of what was to come within Gothic horror on film.
Yeah, and of course we were introduced to Henry, who was renamed to Henry. In the book, he was Dr. Victor Frankenstein,
which is very confusing.
Yes, considering the supporting character is Victor.
It's called Victor.
But it was decided Victor for the lead character would sound too severe and unfriendly to American audiences at the time.
Yeah.
What would be an unfriendly name now?
Let's not get into that. Let's really not get into that.
And the time period is set in this film. When do you think it's set?
Oh, I don't know, actually. I suppose the 19th century.
Yeah, so it's always been the subject of debate. The electronic devices in the film and its sequels suggest a time period of the late 1800s. But Mary Shelley actually wrote the book in the early 1800s. The names of the characters and locations seem to be mainly of German origin, but the actors are mostly British and speak with British accents. And James Whale said that it's meant to be like a fairy tale set in no particular year, which I like.
Yeah, which makes sense. I mean, this is pure fantasy.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
So in a lab, it also means that if you ever wanted to do a sequel to this, once it's in the public domain, you could have like the next scene, people suddenly have mobile phones and everything, and like, hey, hang on, you didn't see what year it was set.
I think the internet would ruin that for everybody.
In a laboratory he's built inside a watchtower, Henry desires to create a human, giving this body life through electrical devices. Think weird science, but he's creating himself a man.
Yeah. So this is, again, pure Gothic.
Yeah.
It almost looks like an abandoned castle, large, very creepy location for this all to go down.
He still needs a brain for his creation, and at a nearby school, Henry's former teacher, Dr. Waldman, shows his class the brain of an average human being and the corrupted brain of a criminal for comparison. Henry sends Fritz to steal the healthy brain from Waldman's class, but he accidentally damages it, and so brings Henry the corrupt brain.
Just to make it clear, I don't think there's any correlation between how a brain looks.
No.
Dependent on the criminality.
Yeah.
I don't think this is based on science, but what am I? I'm not a scientist.
Who knows? I mean, I've never tried it myself.
No.
Henry's fiance Elizabeth has taken her antihistamines because she is certainly not allergic to slaying.
Yeah.
Oh my god, it's the early days of serving cunt, and I love that classic Hollywood look, and she fucking serves it to a T.
She does, beautiful, and I do think some of her, like the fur and such, kind of feels a little more modern than the film. Like it doesn't feel, but then I suppose flapperish. A lot of her attire is compared to the rest of the film, which feels more, like we said, 19th century.
Yeah, she has the absolute nerve to have a costume change every scene she's in, and I'm living for it.
Yeah, I'm living for it. For what she lacks in personality, dare I say it, she makes up for in looks. So she's definitely a look queen.
She is. So she speaks with their friend Victor about the scientist's peculiar actions and his seclusion. He sent her a letter telling her he's hiding away in a castle with a secret that no one must know about. He is sitting on a secret. Yes. And Victor had seen him when they went for a walk alone in the woods together, and Henry told him that he was up to something secret. Nothing like a catch-up during some cruising.
Well, you say that, but Victor has a thing for Elizabeth. But she only has eyes for Henry.
Yeah, he needs a new beard.
Despite his neglect. So, dare I say, this is the new original Challengers.
Well, I mean, yeah, really. Yeah. I just want to see the scene in the woods. I want to know what's going on now. Elizabeth, now wearing the cunty fur coat, and Victor ask Waldman for help understanding Henry's behaviour. And Waldman reveals he is aware that Henry wishes to create life.
And this is, I believe, a big theme of the film.
Yeah.
The desire to create a child without heterosexual intercourse.
Yeah.
So Henry has a disinterest in Elizabeth.
Yeah.
He's engaged to her, but he's not engaging with her.
Yeah.
He's locked himself away, as we said, sitting on a secret.
Yeah. So
we interpret that now as, and how it was probably meant to be interpreted, as he's a closeted gay man. And he's trying to find himself up in this castle. And he's, as in so many coming out stories on film, a young woman is getting her heart broken by a gay man coming out.
Yeah.
Or at least trying to. And, and, this idea of having a child, because in many ways we could interpret Frankenstein's monster as Henry looking to procreate, to create life or a child for him, or indeed create a mate for him, to create a boyfriend of sorts. I think we can interpret it in both ways, not together, but separately. We could see it in that sense.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah. Concerned for Henry, they arrive at the lab on a dark and stormy night, just as he makes his final preparations for the lifeless body on an operating table. Now, I have said this in the Dracula's Daughter episode, and I'll say it again. The aesthetics of the Universal Monsters movies are some of my favourite aesthetics from any horror films ever made. Just that castle, that gothic, stormy night. It's just, again, put it on at Halloween time. It is perfect.
These are, for me, more than sort of elevated horror, should we say? Even though I do think the interpretations and the craftsmanship makes this elevated
Yeah.
horror, but we'll look at it in modern terms.
Mhm.
I would put this in the category of Halloween films.
Yeah.
This is Halloween. This is almost campy at times, but it's got that aesthetic that you put it on a rainy night at midnight. One of those kind of films.
Yeah.
Probably the sequels more, actually. The campiness of the sequels, I think, plays into that as well. But Universal horror is perfect for those kind of evenings.
It is. As a storm rages, Henry invites Elizabeth and the others to watch. Henry and Fritz raise the operating table towards an opening at the top of the tower. The creature and Henry's equipment are exposed to the lightning storm and empowered, bringing the creature to life. And the set design for this, it is incredible.
It's an iconic scene. It's genre-defining visuals.
It is, yeah.
And, of course, the iconic dialogue.
Yeah. The "It's alive, it's alive. Now I know what it feels like to be God." It's, yeah. Everyone knows it. It's been parodied to death. But it's iconic.
It is. It's a very powerful scene, I feel. And again, one of the main themes of the Frankenstein story is man's want to play God.
Yeah.
To live potentially in a society where God isn't needed anymore. And he does that by creating life.
Yeah.
And he kind of admits that he's crazy in this scene as well. So I think he's almost trying to fight these urges.
Yeah,
to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Because he says, quite a good scene, isn't it? One man crazy, three very sane spectators. You know, this is him fighting his urges to a certain extent, but also feeling compelled to do this.
Yeah.
This is his story. This is his coming out, you know.
Yeah.
But he still has reservations about it and thinks, he must be crazy to do this.
Yeah. And it was never... This whole scene was never supposed to be so over the top. In the novel, Frankenstein builds and animates the monster in what is essentially his dormitory room, and the method is never revealed. But Universal wanted the castle laboratory with all the electrical equipment, and
thank God,
this is what we associate now. Can you imagine if it was just in a little,
sewing? Yeah. It's like, hi, yeah.
Elizabeth and Victor visit Henry's father, Baron Frankenstein, and he is obsessed with this idea that Henry's seen another woman. He says, "Why does he go messing around in an old ruined windmill when he has a decent house, a bath, good food and drink, and a darn pretty girl to come back to? Please answer me that."
Yeah.
Doesn't really talk
Please
about
answer me that.
But he said, "Will you tell me that?"
Yeah, he says there is another woman and I'm going to find her.
Yeah.
He's obsessed with lineage.
Yeah.
He's obsessed with Henry and Elizabeth procreating.
Yeah.
And obviously, again, this is pressure. This is pressure from family to have a heteronormative relationship.
So he's finding his way to do that whilst living his homosexual lifestyle. You know,
yes.
He's gay. He can't help that. He still wants to procreate. He still wants to create life. Like his father keeps bugging him to.
Yeah.
And this is the result of that.
In his own way, without having to have intercourse with Elizabeth. And I know that sounds like we might be...
I think it's exactly...
But I think it's absolutely an interpretation.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But yeah, and his dad is your typical weird rich man obsessed with the family continuing.
And we watched the episode today, Sex and the City. Bunny McDougal.
Yeah.
You know,
That's exactly who he is.
Not wanting Charlotte to adopt.
Mm-hmm.
Having, you know, Scottish sons.
Yeah.
Tale as old as time, that one.
Henry and Waldman have a chat at the castle about the experiment, and Henry reveals that the brain inside the creature is the brain from Waldman's lab. And he says to Waldman, have you never wanted to do anything that was dangerous? Where should we be if no one tried to find out what lies beyond? Have you never wanted to look beyond the clouds and the stars, or to know what causes the trees to bud, and what changes the darkness into light? But if you talk like that, people call you crazy. Well, if I could just discover one of these things, what eternity is, for example, I wouldn't care if they did think I was crazy. And if that's not a speech about being gay in 1931, then please tell me what is.
Are you saying that doing something dangerous is
anal?
Having anal. Potentially getting caught and arrested.
Cruising in the park with Victor.
But I think we can also see it as a rejection of God and of religion, and the idea. So the idea that God created everything and don't question it because God did that. So, you know, just carry on. It's fine. But for him to question these things is like, well, why does this exist? Why, what is beyond the clouds and the stars? What is in the sky? Why, you know, what causes the trees to bud? Rather than the answer being, well, God made it that way. Well, maybe God didn't make it that way.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm God.
Mm-hmm.
And people obviously think he's crazy.
Yeah.
And people obviously in the real world thought he was too, because they fucking hated it.
Mm-hmm.
They hated this questioning of God's existence or referring to himself as God.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of life imitating art in that sense as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, very much, you know, on the pulse of things there. But then also again, you know, dangerous acts.
Yeah.
Being openly gay, very dangerous in 1931.
Mm-hmm.
Even more, well, you know, even more dangerous in the late 19th century.
Yeah.
You know? So, absolutely.
Frankenstein's monster enters the room, and despite its grotesque form, seems to be an innocent, childlike creation. And the one in this film actually doesn't physically resemble the character in Mary Shelley's novel. It was makeup artist Jack P. Pierce who came up with innovations such as the monster's flat head, the bolts through the neck, the droopy eyelids, and the poorly fitted suit. And any future Frankenstein film that features any of these physical abnormalities is taking inspiration from Pierce's makeup work. The monster in the novel is described as having very pale, translucent skin, producing a nightmarish effect of showing what is beneath it, and it would have been impossible to show this effect in a film. So at that time, so the makeup that was used makes sense.
Yeah. The monster, he's large, very broad shoulders, very clear strength to him, and should we mention
the Herman Munster shoes?
The Herman Munster shoes. He comes in his Herman Munster shoes.
Interrupts Henry and Waldman's henna session.
Heard of buffaloes coming down the stairs. But the monster is masculine in all the ways that Henry isn't. Because, I mean, elephant in the room moment, Henry's played very fruity.
He is, yes.
I don't know if it's because of the English accent. But there's a fruitiness to him. There's definitely a femininity that is juxtaposed with the hulking great monster.
Yeah.
The masculinity that Henry isn't representing. he's almost tried to create for himself. You know, if this is his child, then it's you know, he's trying to better himself.
Yeah.
In create, you know, people always want their children to do better than they have,
Mm-hmm.
or they want the best children better than anyone else's. If we're interpreting as, you know, the monster being potentially his boyfriend,
Mm-hmm.
then he loves a muscly dude. He loves a big guy.
Yeah.
You know, he loves a tall dude.
He's into
Good
masks.
for him. Yeah.
Henry welcomes it into his laboratory and asks it to sit, which it does. He opens up the roof, causing the monster to reach out towards the sunlight, just like Duran Duran.
Which song?
Reach out for the sunrise? No?
Oh.
Okay. Fritz, true Duran Duran fans will get it. Fritz enters with a flaming torch, which frightens the monster. Its fright is mistaken by Henry and Waldman for an attempt to attack them, and it is chained to the dungeon where Fritz antagonizes it with a torch.
Yeah, so the character of Fritz, I find an interesting one, because I feel like Fritz and Henry are kindred spirits in a sense, which is why they've sort of hold up in together in this place.
Yeah.
Almost like a chosen family kind of situation. Henry, because of his closeted homosexuality, doesn't feel part of society. Fritz, because of his appearance, doesn't feel part of society, and so they're kindred spirits in that sense, and they've isolated themselves from society because of how they would believe society would judge them. So Fritz now has found someone that he believes to be lower in the ranking than him, which is Frankenstein's monster that he's created. So what he does is he punches down. Yeah. And so to make himself feel better, he antagonizes the monster.
But also, I think he's a little jealous that someone else has his attention now.
Potentially. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And here, the monster, in a way, is protecting himself. And what we'll find is that becomes misinterpreted.
Yeah. Hearing Fritz screaming in a dungeon, Henry and Waldman run down, finding that the monster has forcefully hanged Fritz. The monster lunges at the two, but they lock it inside. Realizing the monster must be destroyed, Henry prepares an injection of a powerful drug, and the two conspire to release the monster and inject it as it attacks. I mean, again, if we're going into what each scene means, this could be Henry's homosexuality breaking out of the closet, and Waldman as a man who's aware of his surroundings, and when the film is set, it's like, no, let's put this to sleep.
Yeah, absolutely. Waldman said earlier, you have created a monster and it will destroy you.
Yeah. When the door is unlocked, the monster lunges at Henry as Waldman injects the drug into the monster's back, and it falls to the floor unconscious.
So the monster is reacting to the other's behavior and the behavior towards the monster. But prejudice and assumptions lead Henry and Waldman to assume his innate aggression. And we can absolutely read this as an allegory for prejudice and how, in so many cases, reactions to injustice are judged as inherent characteristics and behavior. And it's sort of, oh, well, I knew you'd react like that, which is why I treated you like shit to begin with. You know, oh, wow, you've shown your true face now, the monster that you really are. Yeah. Because I've just been waving a fucking flaming torch in your face, antagonizing, and then the judgment comes on the reaction rather than an innate behavior. Yeah. Because as we've established, Frankenstein's monster is childlike. Yeah. Innocent. Kind of fresh to the world, in a sense. But Henry and Waldman both know that there's a criminal's brain in his head.
Yeah.
And their assumptions are, well, that brain, it means inherently he's going to try and kill everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Which is fantastic piece of writing, considering the original script was meant to be him actually being that monster.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, okay, cool.
Yeah.
You know, having this interpretation gives the film so many more layers, so much more of an interesting, you know, analysis for us.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Henry collapses from exhaustion, and Elizabeth, now with a cunty hat and gloves combo, and Baron Frankenstein take him home. When they arrive, Baron Frankenstein's like, well, this is a pretty sort of place for my son to be in. A pretty sort of place. This big gay castle is what he's trying to say.
It's a dark room.
Yeah. Henry is worried about the monster, but Waldman reassures him that he will destroy it. Whilst Henry is at home, recovered and preparing for his wedding, Waldman examines the monster, and as he prepares to take it apart and see what's inside there, the monster strangles him.
Yeah.
And honestly, if someone was prodding me, I'd probably strangle them as well. Like, just lying down, waking up from being knocked out by this person.
Yeah, absolutely. But he doesn't. I mean, Frankenstein's monster is essentially either childlike or like an animal.
Yeah.
It doesn't know what's happening, and no one's kind of helping it understand. I do feel like this is also Henry's dream man turning out to be a nightmare, and so he has returned to Elizabeth to live a heteronormative existence. And I do feel I feel like Henry's coming out, he goes back in.
Yeah.
And spoiler alert, it's this way for the end of the film, and he ends up fighting against and surviving his homosexuality and ends up with Elizabeth. And this is him essentially starting that now. At the wedding, or the preparations for the wedding. I don't understand how these things happen. Like
the rehearsal.
Yeah, like we won't get into that and the Freaky Friday-ness of it. But at the wedding rehearsal, his father speaks of family tradition and how he hopes Henry's children will carry on the traditions of the House of Frankenstein.
Yeah. It escapes from the tower, the monster, and wanders through the landscape, encountering a farmer's young daughter, Maria. She asks him to play a game with her, in which they toss flowers onto a lake. The monster enjoys the game, but when he runs out of flowers, he throws Maria into the lake, inadvertently drowning her. And Marilyn Harris, who plays the young girl, was not a good swimmer at the time when the scene was filmed. Despite the safety of rowboats nearby, James Whale had the actress get thrown into the water by Karloff several times to ensure the shoot.
Yeah, that's 1931 filmmaking for you.
That is. Yeah, so this is the first thing I ever saw with this film. It was on one of those compilations. It was either the Channel 4 one or the Bravo one of the 100 Scariest Moments. And it really is shocking.
It's very
shocking. Because when you think about horror cinema, one of the taboos within horror cinema has always been the death of children.
Yes.
And when that line is crossed, it's always shocking. And for that line to be crossed in a film released in 1931, it's really unexpected. And, you know, still just as effective these days as it would have been back then.
Absolutely. And it's very sad as well. So society hadn't taught Maria to fear the monster just yet. The monster being those that are different.
Yeah.
So society hadn't gotten to her just yet. She also, being childlike, because she was a child, saw things as they were and saw the best in everyone and everything. And so the monster was a playmate for her.
Yeah.
So the monster hadn't been taught anything apart from sit.
Yeah.
You know, and therefore his childlike naivety and the isolation
Mm-hmm.
that occurred because of him being misinterpreted,
Yeah.
made it impossible for him to comprehend the dangers of his actions. And so this isn't a scene of horror necessarily. It's a scene of, sadness.
Yeah.
It's shocking because it's actually quite bleak.
It is. It is. And also, where the fuck's her dad going to?
I don't know.
Like, leaving her
He's-
there
yeah.
alone. Like,
What was he? A farmer, so he was
Yeah.
farming somewhere. Where's the mum?
I know, if he wasn't
This
so
is what
neglectful...
happened. This is definitely 1931.
Yeah.
This is what happens when mothers aren't around.
Yes.
Can't all be perfect interpretations.
No. With preparations for the wedding completed, Henry is happy with Elizabeth.
Oh,
And they are to marry soon as Waldman arrives.
Can we talk about the wedding dress?
We can, but let's talk about where it's put to good use. So Elizabeth predicts that something bad will happen. She's like Raven, and that's so Raven. And something will come in between the two of them. She's Mystic Meg. She has a feeling, like Fergie, that tonight is not going to be a good night.
And the poppers in the drawer.
Yes, that gave it away. It's the jockstrap he insists on wearing all the time. Victor rushes in after she predicts this, saying that Waldman has been found strangled. So, top class psychic there. I think she should have pursued that career. Henry suspects the monster did
it's
it.
just a gaydar, isn't it, really?
Well, yeah. Henry suspects the monster. And the monster enters Elizabeth's room, causing her to scream. Now, this wedding dress, this scene, the dress is longer than her future.
Yeah.
Longer than many of our futures. I mean, it's fucking huge. The train is huge. It looks amazing.
It's very 1930s,
It
like
is.
20s, 30s, sort of flapper style. There's I don't know how you would describe it, like not really a bonnet, but do you know what I mean?
The headpiece.
The headpiece, but it's like almost like a cap, and the veil goes back, and it's sheer, and it's beautiful. And it's very glamorous.
Yeah.
Very glamorous.
Yeah. And she faints in the most camp way.
Oh, I love it because you see it's almost like a painting. She's kind of fainted onto the end of the bed. The monster's at the window. He's scarpering. And I just think it's a beautifully shot scene. But leading up to that image, she's screaming, and I don't know how this is interpreted, but I interpreted the monster as almost growling at her, but in almost a sexual way.
I think he's saying yes, Queen, but in Monster 1931 language.
Yeah. Yeah, I like I sort of like the idea of, well, I don't like the idea, but I interpret it as potentially the monster being attracted to Elizabeth. This is the first time that he's seen a older female.
Yeah.
So this could be, I interpret the growl as almost a mating thing. And then when she screams, he scarpers. Because again, somebody is misinterpreting his behavior.
Yeah.
And animalistic side coming out. And again, Henry being rejected by this potential mate that he's created. I find that an interesting interpretation.
And I think what also makes the scene better is the fact that she may have actually been scared, May Clark, because while preparing to film the scene, she admitted to Boris Karloff that she was worried that when she saw him in full makeup coming towards her, she might actually be frightened. So Karloff told her that throughout the scene, he would wiggle his pinky finger out of sight of the camera, so that despite the horrific makeup, she could always see her friend Boris waving at her letting her know she was safe.
No. Method?
Yeah.
A little bit. She just, like, I don't know.
When
you know it's him, hun. He's like,
yeah, this is 1931. Not a lot of people look like this in films until this point.
Yeah, but it's not going to change him. He's like, I don't know. You a little too seriously, my dear.
When the searchers arrive, they find Elizabeth in shock and unconscious on the bed in that wedding dress.
Yes.
And the monster has escaped. Maria's father arrives, carrying his drowned daughter's body through the street. And yeah, again, it's so grim.
Yeah, very dark image of him carrying the corpse. Absolutely.
You know, a lot of people talk about the scene itself where she's thrown in. I think this is maybe even more shocking.
Yeah. You don't... I mean, to see the aftermath like that and to have the actress, like, really playing dead.
Yeah.
Like, really looking like a lifeless corpse. You know, it doesn't look like a doll. I don't think it was a dummy or a doll.
I assume
like,
it's the actress.
It was the actress being carried like that. Very dark image.
Yeah.
And a reminder that we're watching a horror film here.
Yeah. He says she was murdered, and the villagers form a lynch mob to capture the monster, and they start chanting, "Evil dies tonight." During the search, Henry is attacked by the monster, and the monster knocks Henry unconscious and carries him to an old windmill. According to film historian Gregory W. Mank, director James Whale was jealous of the attention that Boris Karloff's monster was getting during the production and took revenge by making the actor carry Colin Clive up the mountain to the mill in take after take dozens of times. Clive felt badly for his co-star and suggested that a dummy be used, but James Whale refused, and Karloff continued to carry Clive's 6 foot, 154-pound body in succeeding takes. That's very catty, James Whale.
Very.
What I love about these scenes is the fact that this film was never meant to be seen in high definition, and you can actually see the creases of the curtains for what is supposed to be the background.
I like that. I think it adds to the charm of it all. Before he sort of goes to take care of the monster, Henry leaves Elizabeth in Victor's care, and he says, "No matter what happens, she's in your care. Look after her." And it's kind of in a way that he hasn't been able to look after her. So when she's attacked by the monster, the reason why or how she interprets it as being attacked by the monster, the reason she can't flee is because Henry locked the door.
Yeah.
So Henry thinks that he has protected her in some sense, but he's actually made the situation worse.
Yeah.
Because he's not a great match for her.
It's true.
He's not. Victor is actually probably a better match for Elizabeth, but, you know, all that business of her being in love with a gay guy. You know? It didn't happen to me, but I'm sure it happens in films a hell of a lot.
It does.
I've never known it to happen in real life to anyone I know, but it happens in films a hell of a lot. These poor women falling in love with these homosexual men and getting their hearts broken. But as he sort of goes off to fight the monster, he says there can be no wedding whilst this horrible creation of mine is still alive. And absolutely, when he says horrible creation, he means his homosexual urges.
Yeah.
There can be no wedding if he is still... What's the name? Dickmatized. No, dickmatized.
Yes, that's true.
Friend of Dorothy, yes. Before the film even came out.
Yeah. The peasants hear the creature carrying Henry and find it climbing to the top, dragging Henry with it, and the monster hurls the scientist to the ground. His fall is broken by the wooden blades of the windmill, saving his life. The screenplay actually originally called for Henry Frankenstein to die from this fall from the burning windmill. And the end of the film was changed, but this is, both Frankenstein and the monster were meant to die here. But reactions to test screenings weren't very kind to it.
No.
So there was a new epilogue filmed after that. But yeah, tradition has long said that future cowboy star Robert Livingston fills in for Colin Clive during this scene because he'd returned to Europe.
Oh, okay.
So of course, first of all, some of the villagers bring him home, whilst the rest of the mob set the windmill ablaze, with the monster trapped inside with nowhere to escape. And at Castle Frankenstein, Henry's father celebrates the wedding of his recovered son with a toast to a future grandchild. And you don't see Henry Frankenstein clearly
No.
after the windmill scene, so it would make sense if that is, if it is.
I would
Livingston.
assume that the idea is that Henry couldn't live as a heterosexual man and therefore had to die at the end with the monster he had created. He shouldn't see himself as a god, and therefore he needs to be punished.
Which is more realistic for a time than...
Yeah, absolutely.
Doing it as opposed to the wedding one's also realistic. You know, she's his beard.
But then also, we kind of... It depends on the interpretation. I feel like at the time, potentially, Henry, with test audiences, would have been seen as the sympathetic character.
Yeah.
And the monster seen as the monster.
Yeah.
When we see it as purely a horror film, then we can look at it in that sense. But when we look at it as open to these interpretations in regards to prejudice and queerness, then we kind of realize that the monster isn't the monster. Is actually a sympathetic character. With the lynch mobs, we're of course reminded of the horrifying images of racially motivated lynch mobs. You know, some have interpreted the image of the burning windmill blades as like a burning cross, an image synonymous with that kind of prejudice at the time. And I feel like these are very deliberate from James Whale. You know, I don't think it just incorporates queerness. I think it does that massively, but I think it includes so much prejudice against people. And the monster is, in my opinion, the heart of the film. And I felt a great sadness when the monster died, because it was a victim of other people's bullshit. Yeah,
that's a sad ending. And like, even the idea of Henry now being married to someone he doesn't want to be married to.
Yeah. Henry has effectively, or on the surface, been cured, and Elizabeth will finally get the good dicking she's waited so long for. Which is a sad ending.
It is.
Henry should have been free to be who he wanted to be. Elizabeth should have been with Victor. Victor had a mustache, you know. Way more masculine.
And that is Frankenstein.
That's Frankenstein.
A horror classic that has influenced many, and it's easy to see why. And just as much as it's one of the best horror films ever made, it's one of the best queer films ever made.
Yeah, and I think it's difficult on the podcast to really convey how influential the look of the film was. And that paired with Dracula at the same time, really just how influential the cinematography and the set design really was. We've talked a lot about the themes, and I think they resonate so much then and now. But really, I think its biggest influence on horror is the visuals, the visual of the monster, the makeup, you know, and all that business. It really is just a film that doesn't come along very often.
It's true.
Really just so influential on what came afterwards.
So, let's give some awards.
Yes.
Biggest queen, I feel like it's just going to go to Elizabeth. on her
Oh,
outfits.
no, I went with Maria
Okay,
for not judging a book by its cover.
that's true. That's true. Biggest gasp. It's got to be Maria's death.
Maria's impromptu swim session and corpse being carried through the streets. Yes, very shocking.
Best dialogue, I give it to Henry's monologue about doing something dangerous.
Oh, I just went with It's Alive.
Yes. And that's camp. I give it to Elizabeth's encounter with the monster while she's in that huge wedding dress.
Elizabeth's date with the monster, definitely.
Ratings, I give it 10 cruising catch-ups with Victor and Henry out of 10.
I gave it 10 Herman Munster shoes out of 10.
Masterpiece, trash, basic camp, or bunch of fun. It's a masterpiece.
It is a masterpiece.
And it's available on DVD, Blu-ray, 4K, and video on demand. And if you enjoyed this, I recommend checking out Nightbreed, another film where the monsters aren't actually the bad guys.
Nice choice. I went with the ever so obvious Bride of Frankenstein.
Oh, yes.
If you like this, you're going to fucking love Bride of Frankenstein.
Well, yes.
Why, yes.
We are Horror Cult Trash over on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Horror Cult Trash on Twitter. I'm Gaz92 on Letterboxd, Gazmo205 on Instagram, and GazCruise92 on Twitter.
I'm Chris Barker823 on Instagram and Letterboxd.
And we are also Gasp Horror Fest across all social media. We are getting closer and closer to the event taking place. Go check it out and get your tickets if you haven't already. Give us a rate, review, subscribe on iTunes, like and follow anything else. Be generous. It's Pride Month. Give some nice words to your favourite gays. And
us.
We'll be back next week when we will be discussing Butcher, Baker, Nightmare Maker.
Yes.
It's been a long time coming.
It's about time.
And we are finally discussing it.
Yes.
So we'll be back same time, same place next week.
Bye.